The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends. Welcome to the next episode of the HX Collective podcast. As you know, we are united at the HX Collective to bring thought leaders and voices together, united in our shared mission of elevating the human experience, elevating human flourishing in work, in relationships, and with self. Today's conversation is with one of my newest friends, Jay Stark, who is a business owner, a wealth advisor, a husband, and a dad, and more specifically, a dad of daughters. And while there is a multitude of things that Jay and I could be discussing in his steadfast commitment to lift the human experience in every aspect of his work, whether it's with his clients, his colleagues, or his community at large, today is a deeply personal conversation that I'm hoping every listener who is a dad will take heart, that having that special experience with your children, and more specifically, dads of daughters, I know that you're going to walk away with some practical insights, a lot of humor, and a deep resonance of humility and gratitude that is Jay Stark. So how is that for a setup, my good friend? Welcome.
Well, it's nice. It's a pleasure to be spending time with you, Deb, and that was quite an introduction. And yeah, let's go.
Well, we've met initially this year through our work experience, but what I can say is such a blessing is, as much as I love working with you in a business context, I have absolutely enjoyed becoming great friends. And in fact, you strike me as somebody that I can't believe I've gone all these years without your person in my experience. And so when we think about the background and sort of the backstory for today's discussion, particularly again, as we're looking at your human experience as being a dad of daughters and lifting the flourishing of those girls, tell us a little bit of the backstory. I think it's always good for our listeners to have the context to understand where you're coming from and, how this all kind of connects to the bigger story. So start, if you will, with your background.
I'm going to go way back to the 5-year-old Jay, and I was a sidekick for my grandpa. He was a retired war vet, and he worked as a maintenance man for a condo unit, and I just loved spending time with him. And one of my earliest memories, I must have been 4 or 5, was in his shop, and he had beer bottles, and I don't know if you have them where you are, but we had little stubby beer bottles and tall beer bottles. And my grandpa asked me, which one holds more water? And I remember thinking, he's not that smart because it's obvious the tall bottle holds more. So he had me fill them up with water and then pour from one to the other. And I just remember being shocked that they held the same amount of water. And it didn't make any sense to me, but I trace my curiosity in life to that moment, because he just taught me that you got to be curious because things don't always appear as they are. And so a couple things there. One, I think grandparents have huge influence, and I had 4 of the best human beings as my grandparents. My grandmas were lovely. My grandpas were fantastic. And so I've always just had a bit of a inkling for young people. I think young people have tons of potential, and we want to draw it out in them. And you can do things like the beer bottle example to spark their little imaginations. And then I actually wanted to be a physiotherapist. I liked working with people, particularly seniors. I wanted to help people, and I volunteered at a seniors home in the therapeutic pool program. And it was fun. I got into the pool, walked people around. They get more mobile when they're in the water. And this one lady in particular, she had had a stroke and couldn't communicate with me. And I talked to her like she could understand me, because when you have a stroke, you can still understand, you just can't communicate. And so she would cry because we were just talking about whatever I was interested in, hockey, whatever. And I really liked that connection. And then a few weeks into this, we were getting out of the pool. There's a lot of dementia patients. And I remember this lady, her name was Rose, and the physiotherapist said, let's go back to our room and we'll change. And she just dropped her bathing suit. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can't do that part of it. I want to help people, but they have to keep their clothes on. So I always had an interest in finance. And so I found my way into the financial world, and now I help successful families. I get the privilege of working with them. And I also learned a lot from the people that I get to work with and guide. So it's kind of a virtuous circle that feeds my curiosity and my desire to learn. And then that led me to meeting you, and then I've learned lots from you. And I think you have that same virtuous circle where you're learning and teaching and learning and teaching. So here
I
we
love
are.
that. I love it. Well, first of all, this moment reminds me, when you make or feel a connection with a person, holding some space to get the backstory outside of a podcast is a really good idea. I love that story about the beer bottles, and I thought you were going to go some direction. Like, I had my first taste of beer at the ripe young age of 5. I should also note the HX Collective podcast has gone global, meaning we've gone all North America, as you may have discerned. I don't know if it was the hockey or the beer reference, but Jay is from Canada. But I do love that experience of being curious and having that desire to help and engage people. I also didn't know the backstory in working with elderly folks, particularly folks that are struggling with either stroke or dementia, as it would be, and the kind of the through line of the virtuous circle that now leads you to really help people live into their elder years, and their families, lean into their elder years. There is a certain circle that I'm seeing, and you make so much more sense to me.
Interesting.
So thank you
Yes.
for that. I'm now, as we sort of have that in the context of things, I remember a few months back, I'm going to say months, but it may be weeks. And by the time this will be released, it will definitely be months. You shared a bit of the celebration that you were having with your bride of 35,
No, no,
oh,
no, no.
20, 80, 29. How many years have we been
Yeah,
with your bride?
28.
28. There you go.
28.
28 years. And so married to your wife 28 years, and you've got 2 daughters, one of whom I've had the privilege of meeting. When I can tell you that, as people are listening to what you have to say today about being dad of daughters, I've seen the evidence that you know a thing or two about this subject matter, having met your daughter. But give us a little bit of a context around your family and your wife and your girls.
Yeah, well, married my high school sweetheart, and we seem to have a life before children, but it's hard to remember that. And then we were blessed with 2 healthy daughters, and that's a journey that has been very challenging and rewarding. And trying to help create little independent, thriving human beings is a challenge these days. So we've just tried our best and learned along the way. And yeah, now they're just sort of leaving the nest, and and so far so good.
They're both in their 20s, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's right. Yeah, 23 and 25. So
You're right there.
right
Well,
there.
as a person who still has a high schooler at home, I am anticipating the launch date of my last, but I suspect, as a parent, the reality is they launch in different ways, but they never leave. And I think that's an important distinction, that sometimes we think that our work is done as parents, but we just transition into that next level of connection and relationship. Jay, I've watched how you treat clients. I've watched how you treat your colleagues. I love how you speak about your high school sweetheart being your bride and your 2 daughters. And I know that a big piece of this is your genuine commitment to having authentic relationships. Tell me more about that. Like, how is the relationship engagement, whether it's with a client or a family member, why is that so important to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think you look back on your upbringing, and like I said, I had caring grandparents, caring parents, tried to raise me to be a good citizen. And I think I have I have that curiosity, can get you into trouble from time to time, but I love that. I think it's, I don't know if that's why we're aligned, but like you need courage to do things these days, whatever age you are. Like it takes courage to step out of your comfort zone, and then I want to help people reach their potential, even when they don't see it themselves. Like I want to help people see their own potential and then have fun along the way. So I like to bring people to their potential or help them or guide them and then see them smile. So that just, yeah, seek to have a bit of fun. I think the work we do is sometimes can be overwhelming. It's very important. It's big. Doesn't mean it can't be fun, and you can't have, be real about it and have a bit of humility along the path. So I don't have it pinpointed where it came from, but it's all these little thoughts along our journey that shape us into who we are. And I've had lots of good influences, and I've sought lots of good influences. Like I think success leaves clues. So I'm like, oh, that's intriguing. We lucked out and bought a home across from two different families that also had two daughters. And I thought, these look like successful families. So let's see what they do. And I learned so much from the fathers, but also from the families. And so I loved what you said about like the journey's not over. We're still learning. I learn more from my daughters than I probably teach nowadays, but it's an ongoing learning. And then, yeah, it
Well,
can be
there's
hard,
power.
but it can be fun too.
Yeah, well, and it's something that I think is I love. And getting prepared for the podcast, you sent me your audition tapes, and I say that with air quotes. Hilarious. Your first time on camera, that was inspired by COVID. Your inner thespian really came out. So I can tell you, the spirit of fun, I think, is a core value. And when fun happens, it's really an individual sport. It's almost always in the context of relationships, and so that core value I see alive in you. I also think one of your superpowers is love. I think that that love of learning, the love of flourishing, the love of humanity. I mean, that's sometimes maybe a driver that we maybe not always name it or frame it as love, but I do see that, and I see that how you do that again in your business context and in your personal life. And I love what you just said about success leaves clues. And when you think about specifically your journey, raising your daughters. I'm curious to know at a really practical level, when you think about, and I'm just thinking about the listener right now. So, someone who may be in a life stage where they don't have a 23 and 25-year-old, that maybe they're in that era of little kids. What were some of the bigger surprises you had when your girls were growing up? And let's say maybe before they were in, grade 6 or 7. So they were younger in their primary school years. What were some of the surprises that you had in raising daughters that maybe you didn't experience, being a young man or having experienced the journey of being a young man who's grown up?
Yeah. I re- One of my first surprises, I got a call from my wife. We had just had our second daughter, Sydney. Lexi was limping. She must have fallen out of bed or something happened. And my wife said, you have to take her to the doctor. So I took her to the doctor, and the doctor examined her. Everything looked okay. And then he said, does she have anything different at home? Like, does she have and I said, yeah, we just brought home a little sister. And the doctor said, oh, well, your daughter here is feeling neglected. And so she's created a fake hip injury to get your attention.
Wow.
And she's not even 2. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this what it's like having daughters? Like the they have the ability to get our attention one way or another. And I was I don't know if surprised is the right word, shocked, maybe startled. And so the learning began that, yeah, little girls are a little different than, I also had a sister, so that helped give me some exposure to that growing up. But that was probably the first surprise. And when they're little, they're two unique individuals. Like they didn't respond the same way to things. So that helped us try to figure out how to treat them properly and to find consequences that mattered to one or the other. And yeah, fair treating kids fairly is tricky from from a parent's perspective, but it's really hard to understand from a kid's perspective. So yeah, those were areas that we found challenging for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, in the midst of, coming through the little kid years, I always think there's some dad superpowers. And so if you were giving advice to a young father who has boys or girls, but maybe the surprise of how little girls may have some distinct behaviors or things that are more genderized, what are some of the dad superpowers that you've cultivated that you would encourage dads of young girls to consider?
Well, I was the fun parent. I also brought a little bit of discipline to the table, but definitely a lot of my energy was to bring fun to the kids. I also didn't really think it mattered that they were girls. They were going to try things, so it didn't matter to me. We I taught them how to throw a hatchet. I taught them how to start a fire. I taught them as they got older. I taught them how to change oil. Uh, um, we had we we had fun. I played with dolls. Like you just you get in their world, but don't define their world. Like give them I wanted them to have lots of experiences. Probably enrolled them in self-defense too young, and they got rattled by that, but they got some good learning. And to me, it's all about learning and building up their self-confidence and building up their resilience. And so um yeah, don't define things, and try to have some fun. And I would say I read a fair bit. Like I don't know that I can learn it all. Parenting is intimidating, so I didn't want to make the mistakes that I could avoid by reading. So I had some really good books that I found that were recommended, again, from watching other people, like Grit. Like I wish I could go back and read Grit a bit earlier, or The Growth Mindset, books that I used to celebrate achievement when they were little, but then I'm like, I wish I would have been less attached to outcomes and more to what they were doing, what they were trying, and so that evolved. So those are things that come to mind.
I love it. Well, and then making that transition, first of all, I can appreciate the adventure that comes with the fun, and at the same time, not being so narrow in defining what is right or appropriate or good, that that exposure can be so uplifting, even if not everything lands. Notwithstanding self-defense class may not have landed fully, but it shaped something. And so there's power in that. And I think it's important for any parent that's listening, mother or father, to recognize that, particularly when they're young, that can be so important to give that experience and to introduce adventure and fun. When kids grow into their adolescent years, and having been a teen girl, I can say it's not for the faint of heart. I can say, having being a mother of 3 daughters and I'm still in the tail of my teen years. I'm curious to know what you observed about yourself as a dad, as your girls became more independent as they were aging in their adolescent years. What are some things that you noticed about your approach and relationship with them?
How I wasn't a teen girl, but I learned a lot about teen girl issues. I think that can be a little intimidating for a man. I got very comfortable with them going through puberty, and not being awkward by it. It gave them lots of hugs, lots of love. I didn't want them to feel like going through those changes were there was no awkwardness for me. That had a lot to do with my wife. I think I struggled with some of their issues because this is what I think you should do, and I learned a lot from the girls and my wife about the female perspective and just how it's a bit different, and maybe that wouldn't apply. And so, still like to give my input and ideas, but there was a lot of learning going both ways through those time periods. I think one of the girls' friends committed suicide when they were young, and I didn't go through that myself, so that was a real challenging time. And then I think I became comfortable talking about uncomfortable things, and that's I don't know how you get comfortable with that. I mean, you just have to be comfortable talking about anything with your kids. and making them feel comfortable talking to you about anything. So
Yeah.
those were all things we were real intentional on making sure the girls were okay.
We're supported, yeah. Well, first of all, what a traumatic moment, and particularly when the life experiences don't give you a lot of perspective, and to lose someone, you know, in your adolescent years. I mean, what a difficult thing. But I so appreciate, in fact, what you're describing is very aligned with a lot of research that suggests the role that fathers play during the adolescent years in building self-esteem, to continue to extend affection, to allow the, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, sort of embracing the awkward. These are bona fide data points that suggest that for a young woman to flourish, these are often the foundations brought upon specifically between the father and daughter. So I think as folks are listening and sort of moving through that process with you, let the record show I said process. I know who I'm talking to. I think that there is a chance, to have some hindsight. And I can imagine, now that the girls have come through university, they're stepping into their first jobs and launching in that regard. What are you so glad that you did in building the relationships you have with your girls before they left the home? Like, what are things now that you're like, man, that was a good call. Way to go, Jay Stark. Like, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, well, a few things. I think what something we started when they were young was we like to go camping, and we started taking our girls on long canoe trips in the north, and it had a couple benefits. One was there's no cell service, so they got disconnected. Their Snapchat streaks got broken. They had to talk again and connect with us, and so those were good things. And then very, very challenging times in the forest. Like we're paddling a canoe and having to portage and having to make our way and navigate and it built their skills, their confidence, their resilience, and we still go on these trips, and they're very glad we did those. I think they built that independent, strong young ladies that we had. I also took them on we hiked mountains in when they turned 12. And they got to pick the mountain, and we went, and even just the car ride to the mountain and back, like it was an 8 or 9 hour drive. We had these amazing, like their father-daughter trips, amazing connections, and wouldn't trade those for anything. And then the little boyfriends start showing up. Like I hang out in the garage, make sure they got home safely, and like just made myself present and prioritized the girls when we were growing up. I mean, I think as a business owner, I had mentors that said, draw the line in the sand. And when you go home, be at home.
Yeah.
And mentally, I struggled with that a bit because I'd still be thinking about things I had to be doing at work or challenges that I was facing. So we struggled a bit with that. Finding that balance was a bit of a challenge, but prioritizing my wife and the girls were important things that I'm glad we did, because the time flies. Like, if
And
you have
it
one
does.
still in high school, they just all started not that long ago,
Yeah.
like
It's
in
crazy. What do they
kindergarten.
say? They
So
say the days are long and the years are short. And I am stunned now. I have a soon to be 22-year-old. I've got a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. And it is everything people say. It is a blink. You're suddenly, you find yourself in a whole nother realm of, their independence and the relationship they have with you and how that evolves. So there's power in what you're saying. And I love, Jay. There's, I think, a lot to be said, things that you did with intention. I want people to take away as a potential action. So the long canoe trips and the car rides, there's a lot of research again that suggests that some of the best parenting moments, what they would call windshield time, or when you are in an adventure space where you have to rely on all of your senses and there's no cell service, there's no distractions. Those are really powerful containers in which to create conditions of safety and human flourishing with daughters. And so some of those takeaways, particularly with dad and daughters. I also love that you did rituals. I don't think there's enough said about the importance of building a sense of tradition, or the 12-year-old rite of passage of the daddy daughter mountain climbing. I can say that mountain climbing might not have been the thing I would have leaned into as a person who grew up in an environment that didn't have that outdoor experience, but it's like use the surroundings that you have to build that rite of passage and that level of condition. Am I hearing you right? Because I think those are some important takeaways.
Yeah, I think I often hear people talk about I don't have much time with my children, but I have quality time
Yeah.
and quality over quantity. And someone said to me years ago, quality is in quantity. You need to spend the time for the quality opportunities to happen. And so that I'm glad I had that influence on me because yeah, you can go to the hockey game, but then they run off with their friend, but you're locked in a car for 9 hours. There's some good conversations that are going to happen. That first mountain that we hiked on when Lexi turned 12, the conditions were not good and we failed to reach our destination. And so we talked about failure and how it's okay. It doesn't define us. And so I don't like failing. And yet those are those are quality moments like that really shaped us. We weren't brave enough to have the third daughter, so I'm curious if by then maybe it's easy. You have it all figured out. You have to tell
Oh,
me.
goodness. You know the answer to that question. You said it at the outset. I mean, it's like, yeah, your 2 daughters, they may be, they're both yours, and they couldn't be more different in what their requirements or needs. So just multiply that by 3, at least
Yeah,
in my
yeah,
experience.
yeah.
But I do love this idea that, again, taking opportunities to be really present and to be intentional and to have the variability of quantity for which quality can emerge. I think that's an important soundbite, a good takeaway. Now that you also have the benefit of hindsight, is there anything that you would have done differently based on what you know now?
Yeah, I think I would have liked to put more boundaries on technology, on probably my own technology use, and yeah, it's such a distraction, and it's like that's a whole. You could just go deep into that, but we did put pretty good boundaries on for the girls. I almost negotiated them out of a couple social media accounts, but they wanted a puppy, and we just didn't quite get on the same page. But I would go back and I'd get them the second puppy, and
Oh,
get them out of there. We try to delay that as much as we could and then put good boundaries on. And those are tricky things. I don't have a lot of regrets. Like I sought out really good mentors and they said that time goes fast. So be there and draw the line in the sand. And so I did those things and I'm grateful for that influence. And I try to mentor young dads to with like I not to pay it forward, but I think everyone can have a mentor and everyone should be a mentor. So I've adopted that and I'm grateful for people who invested in me to be a better dad, better husband, and try to share those nuggets with people because I can't change the world, but I can change a couple people or myself. Maybe I just have to change myself, and that might have an influence
yeah.
that
So
can impact.
as you're reflecting at where they are now and watching them launch into more independence, and I know Lexi in particular is now living in Toronto and you know independent and working sort of 2 jobs, and now that you are thinking about your dad-daughter relationship with the girls in this season, what are some of the things that are leading to the flourishing of the girls and your flourishing? What are you enjoying most that really is lifting that human experience for both your girls and you?
Well, I think that the relationship evolves, and so now I've had some conversations about do you want to learn from me anymore? Like, do you want to learn on your own? And because I'm seeing a couple things, I'd love to give you some feedback, but they have to be open to it. So it's just a different relationship. It's exciting to see them trying things out and having some success and having some challenges and learning and 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 so I don't know. I think life oscillates and it's sad to see them like it's less time for us. So there's a uh, acceptance of that, and
Mhm.
then it's great excitement when you get to connect and and learn how to evolve that relationship to be I didn't think I'd have a long distance relationship with my kids, but yeah, you adapt, and yeah, and it's good to see them succeeding.
Yeah, you pointed to something. A great mentor of mine said that there is a time right around when your kids finish university and they're starting to step into their first jobs and they're, ostensibly moving off the payroll and kind of onto their own payroll, and where your role as parent child really becomes more parent peer, and having that, dialogue of seeking their, I'm gonna say permission, but rather just honoring, do you want the advice? Do you want me to weigh in with a perspective? And how much different that can be when you're very much in the directive role of coaching and guiding and prodding and counseling, to now have that be a bit more welcomed or invited. I'm watching it a bit with my older, as she's getting ready to, she's a year 12 and going to be finishing up her undergraduate this year, and or I should say next summer. And yet I'm starting to see already my natural inclination to tell her what I think, or my natural inclination to offer advice or weigh in on something or communicate a judgment about something. I'm having to exercise more restraint, be more thoughtful. I'm curious to know if you've seen that in your own kind of parent to peer transitions, if there's anything else you might add in your own journey, or maybe it's altogether different.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to you because those are good insights. I think it's our intent is to help. We want to help. How can we help navigate? How can we I see families try to take the struggle away from their kids with their wealth or with their help, and sometimes the struggle is what brought joy to me. I worked hard to earn that, and so I don't want to take that away from the girls. I think there's wisdom in supporting them, cheering them on, and letting them discover some of this for themselves. Like I'm not gonna like yeah, I want them to take self-defense. I want them to be protected. It's easy to protect them when they're 5, but not when they're 15 or 25. Like they have to be able to take care of themselves. And I learned a long time ago, I can't want it more than they do.
Mm.
So I love hockey. I love the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yay!
I love hockey, and my girls, they weren't attracted to hockey. They loved football, they love soccer, they love basketball. But we have a tradition on Christmas, we play hockey. So I have some, we built some traditions in, and I think they like the Blackhawks, but that's just to make me happy, probably. So so I don't think I can nudge them where to go. I want to influence them in a positive path, but I want them to own their path, and then they can thrive because they're doing what they want to be doing. And so I don't know if that's at the heart of what you're talking about,
Yeah,
but that's what I heard when you were describing it. It's
it is. It's absolutely at the heart of it, and I think what you're giving me in your own reflection is something for me to be even more mindful of, how to see myself in connection to the kids, and particularly around the struggle. And, when you have means, it's so tempting to bail. It's so tempting to try and say, I can fix that, or I can take care of that, and leaving some room for them to struggle through, to figure out, how am I going to find a path forward based on my own ingenuity and based on my own creativity, based on my own sacrifices. It can be difficult to hold some of those things back when you could just simply make it easy, and yet to watch them flourish and figure it out, that's, like you said, that's really where the birth of real human flourishing can occur, is the accomplishment and that feeling of accomplishment. I'm also imagining you have a front row seat, frankly, when you think about your work and helping generations of families both accumulate and transition their wealth. And when you think about being with your clients through the ages and stages of the generations, when you think about, I guess, imagine some of your most successful clients, and success not only defined by their monetary wealth, but by their life wealth. And you think about, they have great relationships with their adult children, that there's a certain intimacy and a connectedness, even though their children now are well launched and adults. What do you think the most thriving families that you've served in the work, what do they share in common that produces these great relationships with their adult children?
Yeah, very good question. I think the wealth is multidimensional, so it's not just this bucket of money. It's our relationships and it's our connections to community, and it is financial. When I see one of the benefits of doing the work that we do is we work with a lot of families, and they share stories of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and I think what comes to mind is communication. Families that thrive communicate well, because I believe I'm being fair to my children, but they don't feel they're being fairly treated.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of families will say, well, but this is fair. And you might want to just test that. Hey, how does this feel? And I know we had a conversation, and I was fascinated because I'd seen this with families, and I had the conversation with our daughters about our estate. And we had, in the 4 people, we had 3 different definitions of fair. And I thought that conversation really will prevent problems in the future because there's a common definition now.
Yeah.
Or not that we all agree, but we all understand what the family definition of fair is. So I think communication, and then I like to align what I do with my money with my values. So when families are clear what they value, and they model that behavior with their wealth, they transfer their values, and then they transfer their financial wealth. I see those families who I would say thrive,
Yeah.
and not without challenges. There's life throws challenges, and it's the families that aren't afraid of the harder conversations. They find healthy ways to have those conversations. Sometimes we help shape the conversation because money is not always the fun thing to talk about, but when you define it as your wealth and what it means to you, and then here, because I think that's what intrigues me about being I call it a lifelong learner. Like, I do learn a lot from my daughters, and I've had to remain a little open-minded because I have strong opinions about things, but I hold them loosely so that I can learn and grow and be better. And I've learned a lot from listening to my wife and to my daughters and to my clients. And as I give guidance for a living. It's informed by a lot of the things that I learn along the way.
I love it. Well, 2 final questions. First one is, as I think about practicality, one of the things that we're aiming to do with the HX Collective is to have people like you tell stories, to shed light and wisdom, and then to give really concrete ideas. And so I often talk about the 3 by 30 at the conclusion of my conversations. Are there 3 practical actions? And specifically, as we're thinking about dads with daughters, are there 3 concrete things that you can recommend that a person could make actionable in the next 30 days, wherever they may be on the parenting journey? And frankly, it's maybe we'll say dads and children, because I think what you're about to say may be unique for daughters, but I suspect it will apply across being a dad relative to parenting kids. What are 3 concrete things that you would recommend if a dad said, I really want to change the trajectory of human flourishing in my family? I really want to elevate the human experience as a father of my children. What advice would you give?
Well, I think I would say take your partner on a date. I think how modeling a strong relationship. I love the girl's mom. Like, I love her, and I think I've tried to show them how men should treat women. And so I think modeling that, and you said love, like, that love is hopefully contagious. So take your partner on a date, have a one-on-one with, like, a date with your child. Like those were things that we would intentionally do. Like, what's our date night? It could be a movie, a walk, just something, do something. I love the the book Grit by Angela Duckworth, like effort counts. So if you haven't read that book, I would read that book, and then I would attempt to do hard things with the kids. So if you've ever not started a fire with flint, like it is hard. And the girls, why do we have to do this? And it's just a contest, and letting them succeed at that eventually is exciting. So I would do that, get them to start a fire, and then I would find a mentor, like find someone that you see parenting well, leading well, and learn from them. Like be a bit of a sponge and be curious what they're doing behind the scenes, because I've learned so much from mentors that you don't have one, then seek one out.
Yeah, that's great. Those are such practical takeaways, and I'm so appreciative of the recognition that these are actionable and accessible things that one can do. It requires choice and it requires intention. And I love the modeling you've given us during the entirety of this conversation, that these things aren't just happenstance, they're purposed. And as we think about a more purposed hope for the world, and as we look into the future, when this podcast originally launched and we had a chance to connect, I know there was something in this that sparked. And I thought for sure our conversation was going to center around something in the space of wealth and flourishing in the wealth and et cetera. And when you said to me, I'm a dad of daughters, I think I'd like to talk about that, I was just like, wow, that is so powerful, as if I needed more reasons to think the world of you. And, as you have a hope for the future, and as you think about 10 years from now, and you think about how women are thriving, how dads and daughters are thriving in relationships, what would you hope for to be better or different in the future when you think about this important relationship that leads to human flourishing?
A few things come to mind. I think mindsets are huge. And I coached the girls in football, and I noticed the girls apologizing for everything. They would not catch a ball. They would say sorry. They would not, sorry. And I got really frustrated. I'm like, you're trying, like, you don't need to apologize. And so, but it was consistent. All of them were always apologizing. So I instituted a no sorry rule, no apologizing. If you try to catch a ball and it doesn't work out, no apologize. But they kept apologizing. So then I forced them to do push-ups every time they said sorry. And so they would say sorry, and then they'd have to do 2 push-ups. And this young girl, she said, I can only do girl push-ups. And I'm like, what's a girl push-up? And she gets on her knees, and and I said, no, that's not a girl push-up. That's a beginner push-up. It has nothing to do with a girl or a boy. And she just looked at me and she said, oh, and then, she kept apologizing, and then she got good at doing push-ups, and she could do a push-up not on her knees. And I'm like, what are the mindsets that hold people back? Like, I have a degree in statistics and mathematics and business, and that I wish I had one in psychology, because a lot of what holds us back from flourishing is our own mindsets. So I think what comes to mind is that a quote I received early in my career, the 10 most powerful 2-letter words. And I was like, this is ridiculous, but it's powerful. It's, if it is to be, it is up to me. And so it's like, okay, that's powerful. I can be the author of my own flourishing, no matter what my circumstances. And it's easier said than done. I'm not trying to make light of people's circumstances, but I can take control. And it's like, what are these mindsets that some little girls have that we need to help them? That's what gives me hope. We sponsor an award for philanthropy, the culture of philanthropy, for this organization we support. And this year, the award's going to an 8-year-old little girl who had lemonade stands all summer to support charities that helped her little brother who was sick. I'm like, oh, what's this world going to look like with people like that? So it gets me fired up when I think about young people and building healthy mindsets for them to reach and pursue their potentials.
I love it. Well, Jay, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and I'm so excited to have our listeners get to know you. We'll have some of the resources that you've highlighted loaded up in the show notes. I can't wait for our next conversation. And thank you for giving me two important takeaways. Number one, I will never call it a girl push up again. I'm still in beginner push ups, but I can do them. And secondly, I think there's just the power of mindset and how we can influence people to see and think differently so that they can be the author of their flourishing. They can be an advocate and an agent in their continuous growth and learning. So thank you, my friend. I'll see you soon.
Well, thanks for inviting me into this conversation and thanks for your leadership. The world needs more Deb. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, my friend. Bye now. Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.